So here's where we're starting today. I'm back in 2022, but right now I'm filming this on July 17th when Strange New Worlds Season 3 officially premieres in America on Paramount+. But if you're in much of Eastern Europe, Sky Showtime and Paramount decided to drop a real, let's call it a crunchy bone, by delaying the Season 3 launch until August 4th. A full 18 days later. Yeah, I know, it's kinda annoying. Don't ask. But on the other hand, that delay kinda gave me a little extra breathing room and inspired a plan. I decided to dive into Seasons 1 and 2 before reviewing Season 3. Why? Multiple reasons. First of all, I have no intentions going on pirate websites in order for me to download, and watch Strange New Worlds and kind of risk all kinds of viruses and God knows what on my computer. I'm just not doing that. I'm too old for that crap. Number 2 is to build out my algorithm with all the classic Season 1 and 2 moments, because I am determined to dodge any Season 3 spoilers. And finally, because the first 2 seasons are worth re-exploring. They kind of set the table beautifully for what's to come. So this isn't just nostalgic. It's, if I may say so, strategic. I'm charting pre-mission course through all the warp trails so I can compare how far the show's come by the time we drop to Season 3. Now, back in 2022, Star Trek was in a really strange place. Discovery has gone full space emotion cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. Picard was wrestling with nostalgia and nanoprobes, and for some reason, too much influence of Doctor Who. But that's gonna be a whole different conversation. And fans were starting to wonder, could Trek still just, boldly go? Then came Strange New Worlds. It was marketed to us as a return to classic Trek formula. We're talking about episodic storytelling, optimistic exploration, and last but not least, a captain with great hair. It launched with plenty of promise. The show reintroduces us to Captain Christopher Pike, who was played by Anson Mount, whose previous appearances in Discovery left many of the fans wanting more. And now, here he is, front and center, commanding the Enterprise with charisma, self-doubt, and a coffee mug that says Captain. Okay, I made up that last one, but I wouldn't be surprised if I genuinely see a coffee mug that says Captain on this show. So this was supposed to be a new entry point, a reset. And for the most part, it works. But as I rewatched the pilot to take some notes and write this review, I realized something. I had completely forgotten what actually happened in the episode. And that's the problem. And that's where things get complicated. The episode opens up with Pike in Montana, eating breakfast with his girlfriend. Yeah, Star Trek writers are still determined to prove that nerds can write romance. They can't. Anyways, he's wrestling with the knowledge of his own future, so if you know, you know. He's pulled back into the service by Admiral April after Una Chin Riley #1 goes missing on the first contact mission. The Enterprise launches to rescue her, only to discover that this alien society has built a warp-capable weapon by reverse engineering signals from the Federation. That's not how warp is supposed to work. Diplomacy, subterfuge, and a little bit of Vulcan judo ensue. Eventually, Pike gives a speech, there's hope, the day is saved, roll credits, we're done. Look, on paper, that's a solid Trek episode. Ethical dilemma, cultural misunderstanding, and a ship full of competent weirdos solving problems. But the execution left me kinda lukewarm. Let me be honest with you, even though this is the first episode, the cracks were visible to longtime Trek fans right away. That doesn't mean the ship was taking on water, but it does mean I kept one eye on the structural integrity. On the positive side, there's something really satisfying about seeing characters who are just sketches or single episode figures in the original series finally get some dimensionality. Take T'Pring. She showed up once in the classic Amok Time TOS episode. And let's be honest, she wasn't exactly written to win hearts back then. Now the writers are giving her a backstory and a personality and a place in Spock's life beyond being the fiancé. That's it, really? We're 10 minutes in and Spock is already shirtless? I mean, look, guys, I get it. Even Pike's contract clearly includes at least one no-shirt scene per season. But if the whole point of the scene was to tee up some Vulcan romance, maybe let's not make it feel like the entire engagement ritual was just a scenic detour to Abswell. Once again, Star Trek writers like to remind us they still haven't figured out how to write romance in a way that doesn't make you wanna just close your eyes and pretend you haven't seen it. And then there's the crew. We also meet Ortega's Dr. Mabenga and delightfully flirty Nurse Chapel. And let's not forget Cadet Uhura, whose presence alone reminds us how narrow the path really is. Look, characters like Uhura and Spock are sacred to Star Trek fans. She's one of the most beloved figures from the original series. Iconic, not just in Trek lore, but generally in television history. And now, here she is in a prequel, played by a new actress with a new backstory. That's not just casting. It's a tightrope walking over the Vulcan forge. Look, there are some clever nods to the cage too. When Pike steps onto the bridge and makes a comment about number 1, it's a flipped version of the original "I'm not used to women on the bridge" kinda sentiment. It is a wink wink and a nod to the old school fans. And while I appreciate the effort, it kinda toes the line of being too self-aware. The writers clearly want us to know this is real Trek. These are real characters. You're safe now. But sometimes that effort feels like they're trying too hard to prove it. Still, credit but where credit is due. The show handles Pike's fate with real finesse. For those of us who watched The Menagerie, TOS's 2-part rework of The Cage, we already know where Pike ends up. And for folks like me, who bailed out of Discovery after season 1, I was pleasantly surprised that they didn't drag out the mystery of how Pike knows his future. It's laid out clearly within the first 20 minutes or so, and I think it works for both the returning fans and the total newcomers. Now, what's more impressive is how they frame Pike's dilemma. It's not just about self-preservation, it's about self-trust. He's not only afraid to die, because most of us are. He's afraid that knowing his future might take him too hesitant to act, or too reckless. That's a complex, layered fear, and Anson Mount plays it with some real depth. Now, there's a beautiful thematic thread there too. Pike tells Spock he's seen the moment his life ends, not physically but spiritually. He literally says, a death of the man that I am today. He reflects that every human somewhere deep down believes they'll escape fate. They'll cheat death. And that theme weaves directly into La'an's trauma when she talks about surviving the Gorn. We'll talk about the Gorn themselves later. She says not believing you're going to die is what is going to get you killed. That line too speaks to denial and survival. And it all culminates in Pike's closing line in a speech that he's giving to the aliens. Until the last moment, the future is what we make it. That's good writing. So I'm gonna give them all the props. That's Star Trek. So let's start with the Gorn, and specifically Arena. Even if you have never seen the original series, you've probably seen that moment. Captain Kirk, dusty and bruised, wrestling a slow-moving rubber lizard. It's a meme. It's the parody, the cultural shorthand of the old school Star Trek. And yes, we laugh now, but back in 1966, that rubber suit was cutting edge for a show working with limited resources. Trek didn't have a blockbuster budgets, but it did have a heart. And Arena has it in spades. Look, that episode is not about fight choreography and the film rocks. It's about the moment Kirk wins and chooses not to kill. That act of mercy, of holding back when vengeance is justified, is the point. It's Star Trek boiled down to its essence. When faced with power, we choose compassion. That's what makes Strange New Worlds' reimagining of a Gorn such a jarring shift. Now, they're presented as faceless monsters, literally horror villains, who use human beings as incubators and push survivors out in space on rafts. There was no moral question, no ambiguity, just fear and brutality. And as a longtime fan, here's where it really breaks for me. I'm supposed to believe that at some point, Captain Kirk is going to meet these Gorn, the ones we've now turned into a nightmare creatures, and make peace with them, that will somehow find common ground with a species that treats humans like a disposable egg sacs? No way. Not even with the best diplomacy in the galaxy. It kind of pushes the internal logic way too far. It really breaks the world. Look, not every species in Trek needs to be relatable. Some are unknowable, and that's fine. But Trek is about trying. The problem here is that reimagined Gorn make peace really seem impossible. There is no line from this episode to Arena that makes sense. Even as a prequel and as a fan, that disconnects me on the edge from the very beginning. Now, for the new viewers, this might not be any problem whatsoever. Maybe they just see as spooky aliens and keep moving. Maybe they will roll their eyes seeing a xenomorph in Star Trek. For those of us who carry decades of Trek in our hearts, this isn't just a lore tweak. It's a fundamental break. And when we're talking about not good things in this first episode, let's talk a little bit about Warp Bomb. Look, conceptually, it works. A species misunderstanding warp signals and turning them into weapons? Yeah, that's smart. That's Trek. But calling it a warp bomb feels like the writers grabbed a sticky note labeled sci-fi danger and forgot to swap it out in the final draft. The episode even explains the tech, matter and antimatter, just like warp cores always have, but then keeps using this silly term that sounds like something from a toy commercial. It really is unintentionally goofy, and it pulls focus from what could have been a weighty moment. Oh, and just one last bit of legacy though, just for the fun of it. If you've never seen Star Trek, here's a neat fact. Both Number 1 and Nurse Chapel were originally played by Majel Barrett, who was not only Gene Roddenberry's wife, but also a reoccurring presence throughout Trek history. She played multiple roles across TOS and TNG and DS9, and was the voice of the computer in every iteration for decades. So seeing both those characters show up in one episode of Strange New Worlds, it really is a fun little bit of Trek trivia. It's a rare case where two of her personas overlap. Look, it's not a tribute, it's not a retcon, it's just a cool connective thread for fans who know. Rewatching the pilot of Strange New Worlds felt like running into an old acquaintance in a dark alley with a fresh haircut. You think you recognize them. You think you know who they are, but you're not sure you'd follow them into the bar just yet. The show is walking a careful line, trying to appeal to seasoned fans who grew up on The Next Generation, The Voyager, or even the original series, while still opening the hatch wide for new viewers who just want good sci-fi with a sense of hope. That's a tricky orbit to hold, but it's trying, and that effort deserves credit. Look, this is not a perfect episode. It's not even particularly memorable on the first watch. It's more of a welcome mat. If you have ever wondered whether Star Trek is for you, it's kind of a gentle invitation. The stakes are digestible, the characters are mostly charming, and the cinematography does a lot of heavy lifting to make the whole experience feel premium. Just try not to think too hard about the warp bomb, or the horror Gorn, or why Spock lost his shirt so early. Some questions don't need answers. And that's it for this episode. So, have you watched Strange New Worlds? If you have not, are you planning to? And if you did, what did you think about the first episode of Season 1 called Strange New Worlds? Let me know. And see you tomorrow with the next episode, Season 1, Episode 2, Children of the Comet. See you soon.